Welcome to Weekly News Highlights, where we wrap up your week with a glimpse back into what went on over the past week. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. South Korea this week successfully launched its first homegrown Earth observation satellite, which will monitor and take images of the Korean Peninsula and the surrounding waters. 10 more nanosatellites will join the first one by 2027. South Korea and Romania agreed to bolster cooperation in defense, nuclear power plants, and more. The leaders of the two countries held a summit in Seoul, marking the first time in 16 years that a Romanian leader has visited South Korea. South Korea's GDP growth went up by more than 1% in the first quarter of this year, led by an increase in construction investment and a recovery in exports. South Korea's very first domestically produced Earth observation satellite successfully made it into orbit this week. It's called Nanosat-1, and this nanosatellite is smaller than other satellites, weighing under 100 kilograms. Its main mission is to monitor and take images of the Korean Peninsula and surrounding waters. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
South Korea's homegrown Earth observation nanosatellite launched into orbit Wednesday morning made first contact with the ground station in Daejeon at around 11:57 a.m. According to data sent to the Korea Aerospace Research Institution, Nanosat-1 solar panels were deployed successfully. Two-way communication was then established at around 2:13 p.m. and 3:44 p.m. with the King's Haejong station in Antarctica, confirming that the launch was successful. The Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, or KAIST, is expected to test the satellite body and optical payload's performance for a month and examine the quality of the observation images for 5 months. If all is considered fine, the Nanosat-1 will start its Earth observation mission this November. This satellite, developed by the Satellite Technology Research Center at KAIST, was launched from Rocket Lab's spaceport in New Zealand on Wednesday morning at around 7:32 a.m. Korea time. It was attached to Rocket Lab's lightweight Electron orbital rocket, along with an advanced composite solar sail system created by the U.S. National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The launch was supposed to take place at 7:08 a.m., but after some delays, eventually went ahead at around 7:32 a.m. 50 minutes later, the satellite reached space at an altitude of 520 kilometers. Nanosat-1 is just the start of South Korea's beginning of the Swarm mission, which aims to establish a satellite constellation network by 2027, with 10 more satellites using the homegrown Mideast space rocket. Afterward, a total of 11 satellites will capture optical images with a resolution of about 1 meter from an altitude of 500 kilometers for around 3 years. The Science Ministry says that through this satellite cluster, not only will the country be able to quickly respond to natural disasters and security threats, but it could also reduce the cost needed to purchase satellite images from overseas. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Now, over in North Korea, the leader Kim Jong-un guided the regime's first nuclear counterattack drills on Monday. He blamed Seoul and Washington's recent air drills for raising tensions on the peninsula. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung has more.
North Korea has revealed that it staged tactical drills simulating a nuclear counterattack using super-large multiple rocket launchers for the very first time. The training guided by Kim Jong-un on Monday was focused on strengthening the regime's nuclear counteroffensive using 600mm multiple rocket launchers. The North state-run newspaper Nodongshinmun reported Tuesday morning that Kim was satisfied with the rocket's accuracy. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff detected the launch of multiple short-range ballistic missiles on Monday, launched toward the East Sea from the Pyongyang area. Pyongyang has claimed a tactical nuclear warhead could be mounted onto the weapon, but Seoul's military evaluates that the claim has been exaggerated, as it said the regime still appears to be carrying out tests. And according to the regime, the rockets hit its island target at a range of 352 kilometers. This is approximately equal to the distance from Pyongyang to South Korea's Garyongdae military headquarters in Chungcheongnam-do province. The South Korean military stressed that it has a system in place to detect and intercept ballistic missiles if they were to fly toward the south. It also sent a stern warning to the north.
International security cooperation, including territorial cooperation between South Korea, the US, and Japan, will be further strengthened. If North Korea attempts to use nuclear weapons, it will face an immediate, overwhelming, and decisive response from the ROK-US alliance, and the regime will come to an end.
Pyongyang said Monday's drills were conducted to send a clear warning to its enemies, as it denounced Seoul and Washington's recent joint air drills for raising tensions. But South Korea's military has said that there is another motive behind the launch, promoting exports to Russia.
We believe there is a complex purpose, like demonstrating the performance of the super-large multiple rocket launchers for exports.
The speculation comes as a military source said Russia's government delegation visited North Korea on Monday under the radar. This raises the possibility that Pyongyang, which has been criticized by the international community for exporting weapons to Moscow, is intentionally hiding the visit to make additional arms deals. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Also this week, North Korea sent its highest-level delegation to Iran on a rare public trip, where the two sides are likely to discuss missiles and nuclear weapons, raising concerns about military cooperation. Our North Korean Affairs correspondent Kim Dami reports.
An extremely unusual announcement even for North Korea came on Wednesday morning. The regime's official newspaper, the Rodong-Sinmun, said the External Economic Relations Minister Yoon Jong-ho and his delegation had left Pyongyang on Tuesday to visit Iran. The purpose or details of the visit have not been revealed.
I think the North's delegation must have a lot of issues to discuss. They will likely discuss missiles, nuclear weapons, and what to do when the U.S. is pressuring Iran, China, as well as North Korea, and how to work together in these circumstances.
Exchanges between scientists from the North and Iran have been consistent. And although they have never admitted it, it is widely believed that North Korea and Iran have been working on missile development since the 1980s. There's even speculation that the Iranian missiles fired at Israel on April 13th may have included North Korean components or technologies. Experts said with tensions rising, South Korea should take a wiser stance to global and regional security.
I hope the government will benchmark the diplomatic strategies of Japan and Saudi Arabia. For instance, Japan appears it's not that close with China and is a key member of America's East Asia-Pacific strategy, but Japan somehow manages a neutral relationship with China and with Iran as well. This is because Japan doesn't stir the relations firsthand amid closely cooperating with the U.S.
Experts added the alliances in the international communities now are driven by countries' respective national interests and said they hope South Korea will take a calmer approach and make diplomatic decisions more wisely. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Romania's leader paid a visit to South Korea for the first time in 16 years this week. President Yoon Suk-yeol hosted his Romanian counterpart Klaus Iohannis on Tuesday at the Yongsan office. There, the leaders sealed deals on defense and more. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Soo-young has the details.
South Korea and Romania agreed to strengthen their strategic bilateral ties, inking deals to cooperate on defense weaponry and nuclear power plants. That's according to a joint statement released by President Yoon Suk-yeol and his Romanian counterpart Klaus Iohannis following their summit at the Yongsan presidential office on Tuesday. Building on their existing bilateral consultations on defense-related issues, the two nations agreed to ramp up cooperation in jointly producing military equipment and defense technology, and establish working-level talks between the two sides to address pertinent issues. The two also agreed to work together to address cybersecurity and showed interest in advancing negotiations for the Korea-European Union Security Partnership. Another key outcome was nuclear energy, as Seoul seeks opportunities for its companies to win contracts to build small modular reactors abroad. The two governments signed a memorandum of understanding to establish nuclear energy cooperation, including on nuclear facility enhancement, nuclear fuel, nuclear waste management, as well as personnel development and information on supply chains. While committing to non-proliferation and the civil use of nuclear power, they agreed on the importance of nuclear technology in meeting global net zero targets, with Romania backing South Korea's carbon-free energy initiative. The two nations will also increase cooperation on infrastructure development, based on a deal reached last May between Busan Port Authority and Romania's Port of Constanța. Based on their shared values of democracy, human rights and the rule of law, the two countries agreed on the need to strengthen multilateralism, especially in the face of global security challenges. They condemned North Korea's illegal nuclear and missile programs, calling for its denuclearization and the human rights of its oppressed citizens. Seoul and Bucharest also criticized Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, agreeing to ramp up collective pressure on Moscow through restrictive measures. Amid global supply chain disruptions and the ongoing transition to green energy, the two countries agreed to build on South Korea and the EU's frameworks, including on free trade, economic security, and green and digital partnerships. With bilateral ties stretching back to 1990, upgraded to a strategic cooperation in 2008. This marks the first time in 16 years that a Romanian leader has visited South Korea. Following his summit with Yoon and a meeting with Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, Johannes will visit power plant builder Tusan Enerbility's Changwon factory on Wednesday before he leaves for Romania on Thursday. 오수영, Arirang News.
South Korea's economy grew by 1.3% in the first quarter of 2024, sealing the highest on-quarter increase in more than 2 years. Now, calling this a surprise, the presidential office indicated the possibility of an upward revision to the growth outlook this year. Our An Sung-jin reports.
The pace of South Korea's economic growth has been picking up on the back of strong private sector spending and is expected to continue throughout the second half of the year. That's according to South Korea's Chief of Staff for Policy after the Bank of Korea on Thursday announced the country's economy had grown 1.3% in the first 3 months of this year compared to the previous quarter. This is the highest quarter-on-quarter increase since the fourth quarter of 2021, when the gross domestic product grew by 1.4%. Increased construction investment and a recovery in exports contributed to the growth. Civil engineering and building construction showed strong performances, while exports of IT products such as phones also propelled the increase. An official at the central bank explained the reasons behind the growth.
On top of improved consumer sentiment, the release of new smartphone models boosted private spending. However, growth in the construction sector may be temporary, coming from a base effect of low investment last quarter and more construction being wrapped up with the nicer weather.
Consumer spending grew by nearly 1% as expenditure on goods and services such as restaurants and accommodation rose. The economic growth seen in the first 3 months of this year is notable in that exports and domestic consumption show a relatively balanced portfolio, with private spending contributing 0.7%. The presidential chief of staff for policy underlines the importance of such growth.
It appears that we're returning to positive signs of growth, where the economy is led by private spending rather than government financing. If domestic consumption expands, the country's economic growth will continue, potentially exceeding this year's forecast of 2.2%.
On the production front, manufacturing went up by 1.2%, with an increase in chemical products and transportation equipment, while wholesale and retail services also saw increases. As data released on Thursday is a preliminary quarterly estimates, the final figures for the upcoming national accounts may be altered, with more recent external factors being added. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
As for the latest on Korea's bleak demographic portrait, the latest findings show the number of births dropped to the lowest for any February, while the number of deaths sharply rose. Our Park Gon-woo has this report.
South Korea's population shrank again in February. According to preliminary data released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the number of births dropped 3.3% on year, with just over 19,300 babies born. That's the lowest figure for any February since related data was first compiled in 1981.
The financial burdens, such as housing costs, are one of the reasons for low birth figures. And changes in people's perception nowadays that it isn't a must to get married and have kids is another reason.
While saying it would not be realistic to expect birth rates to rise again immediately through governmental policies, one expert said changing people's values and perceptions is much more important.
Instead of encouraging people to have children, it might be better to come up with policies that allow people to know that society is able to support people with different thoughts and different types of families, such as an unmarried woman having a child.
Also in February, the number of deaths jumped by 9.6% on year to nearly 30,000. According to Statistics Korea, the country's aging population pushed up the number of deaths for people aged 85 and above, while data was also affected by the extra day in February, with 2024 being a leap year. With more deaths than births, South Korea recorded a natural population decline of more than 10,000. That means 52 straight months of natural population decline. Also in February, the number of registered marriages stayed just under 17,000, down 5% compared to the year before. Statistics Korea said that fewer workdays that month due to Lunar New Year celebrations meant fewer opportunities for couples to register marriages. However, the agency said the total number of marriages for January and February did see an on-year increase of 3.3%. 7,300 divorces were recorded in February, up 1.8% from the year before. Park Gon-woo, Arirang News.
For the first time, more than half of people employed last year here in South Korea had a college degree. This is according to Statistics Korea on Wednesday. The figure is a record high, with a 50.5% boasting at least a two-year college certificate. Now, this is a significant rise considering the figure stood at just over 30% 20 years ago in 2003. However, findings also showed most college degree holders were employed at large companies as compared to their smaller counterparts. U.S. President Joe Biden this week finally signed a law securing billions of dollars in the U.S. aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Biden already secretly approved the transfer of long-range missiles to Ukraine earlier this month.
$95 billion US. That's the amount of aid the U.S. is now providing in emergency foreign aid after approval from U.S. President Joe Biden. Of the $95 billion, $61 billion will go to Ukraine. After signing the bill, Biden said while the bill's path to his desk was difficult, but in the end, it did what America always does, rising to the moment to get things done. Biden also emphasized that the aid to Ukraine is not only for the security of Ukraine, but also for Europe and the U.S.
You know, this package is literally an investment, not only in Ukraine's security, but in Europe's security, in our own security.
The signing of the bill also allows for the U.S. to begin shipping equipment to Ukraine, including for air defense tech, artillery for rocket systems, as well as armored vehicles. However, according to ABC News, the United States already provided Ukraine with long-range ATACMS missiles last month, following orders from Biden. The missiles have already been used by Ukraine in their fight against Russia, including in Crimea last week and again in the port city of Berdyansk this week. ATACMS missiles can generally reach distances between 70 to 300 kilometers, enough to hit Russian territory. Biden's signing of the bill comes after the Democrat majority Senate approved a package that also includes $15 billion in military aid for Israel, $9 billion in humanitarian aid for Gaza and other war-torn regions, and $8 billion in security assistance to deter China's aggression in the Indo-Pacific. The bill was first requested by the Biden administration last fall, but was met with Republican-led opposition in the House before a sudden reversal by House Speaker Mike Johnson. 이승재, Arirang News.
This week marked 200 days of the war between Israeli forces and Hamas, with tensions once again ramping up in Gaza after Israel pulled most of their troops out of the enclave. Hamas on Wednesday released a video of injured Israeli-American hostage Hersh Goldberg-Polin. Missing his left arm, the hostage addressed the Israeli government and criticized its failure to secure a deal for the release of the remaining hostages.
Hamas has released a new video showing an Israeli-American hostage. The person in captivity identified himself as 23-year-old Hersh Goldberg-Polin. He was kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival during Hamas's attack on October 7th. In the video, the hostage says that he has been in captivity for 200 days, suggesting that the video was filmed on the 200th day of the war this week. However, the exact date of filming is yet to be verified. In the video, the hostage criticizes Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the government for failing to save the remaining hostages, as other Israeli hostages have done in Hamas hostage videos. He also says that Israel's airstrikes killed 70 captives in the Gaza Strip. After watching the video, the parents of Goldberg-Polin, who've been actively campaigning for the release of their son, told him to stay strong.
And Hersh, if you can hear this, we heard your voice today for the first time in 201 days. And if you can hear us, I am telling you, We are telling you, we love you, stay strong, survive.
His parents also made a plea to the negotiating parties to get a deal done and end the suffering. Meanwhile, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan called for the immediate release of the hostage.
All I can say is this is an innocent young man being held hostage by a terrorist organization, and he should be released immediately without condition and without delay.
According to Reuters, Goldberg, Poland is among the 133 hostages still held in Gaza, after more than 100 were released last year. Israel has been launching assaults on Gaza in an attempt to rescue them. More than 34,000 Palestinians have been killed since the start of the conflict, according to Gaza's health ministry. The United Nations is particularly concerned about the number of children killed. The UN Commissioner for Human Rights says a child is being killed or wounded every 10 minutes. Choi Min-jang, Arirang News.
Ever since Iran and Israel traded direct attacks in each other's territory for the first time, heightened geopolitical tensions have been felt in South Korea's economy. Joining me to discuss is our economics correspondent Moon Hae-ryun. Welcome back, Hae-ryun.
Thank you for having me.
So Hae-ryun, let's begin by talking about oil prices. What's been happening to international oil prices because of the conflict in the Middle East?
Well, Tammy, oil prices have seen fluctuations over the past 2 weeks. Last week, oil prices shot up. The global benchmark Brent crude oil jumped by more than 3% and surpassed $90 per barrel as Iran and Israel traded direct attacks against each other's territory for the first time. Oil prices have also been fluctuating this week following Israel's limited retaliatory strikes, but did come down with traders dismissing the possibility of a sustained war between the two sides and the likelihood of the Strait of Hormuz being cut off. Washington might also place sanctions on Iranian crude oil, but the oil market's response has been limited so far.
Then how are these oil prices relevant in South Korea's current economic climate? I mean, what has the government been doing to try and tackle these hikes?
Well, Tammy, you see, the main concern regarding oil prices is how it could be affecting consumer prices and whether it could become an obstacle to bringing the country's headline inflation down to the 2% range by the end of this year. The Federation of Korean Industries gave 4 different scenarios for how oil prices could affect consumer prices based on past case studies such as the 1973 oil crisis. Should active conflict break out and crude oil prices rise to over $100 per barrel, consumer prices could rocket up past 4%. And experts say that a fuel tax cut won't bring headline inflation down. Here's what one expert said, given that the core inflation rate, excluding food and energy prices, has been stable at around 2.5% this year.
This figure is the lowest level since 2022, implying that the price level, excluding the energy products, has stabilized a lot during the last 2 years. So, given that the price level has become already stabilized a lot compared to before, we can expect that the effect of the tax cut will be somewhat limited.
Then, other than oil prices, what other changes has the South Korean economy seen following these attacks?
So the South Korean won has been sharply depreciating against the US dollar over the past 2 weeks, with the US dollar strong in markets around the world. Recent data has shown that the exchange rate between the two currencies has risen by over 7% this year, and this rate exceeds that of the rate seen during the financial crisis of 2008. So last week, Finance Minister Choi Sang-muk met with his counterparts from the US and Japan in Washington, D.C. and addressed concerns over the sharp devaluation of currencies against the dollar. Here's what he said.
Our 3 countries need to cooperate to actively respond to the financial instability that real economic uncertainty can cause.
The governor of the Bank of Korea also commented on the unstable currency exchange market during a press conference, saying that the volatility with the $1 exchange rate has been somewhat excessive and it should be minimal going forward as long as the situation in the Middle East does not get any worse. And he wasn't wrong. Looking at the $1 exchange rate this week, it's been less unstable than immediately following the attacks last week.
Now, if investors are seeking safe haven assets, wouldn't that also affect the country's stock market, especially the country's benchmark Kospi?
You're right, Tammy. So the benchmark Kospi index has also seen a sharp decline. Last Friday, it dipped below the 2,560 mark for the first time since February. And this comes as foreign investors seek safe haven assets. But pundits say another big factor for stock investors has been hawkish remarks from Federal Reserve officials that shot down hopes of rate cuts earlier this year. Here's what an expert said.
For high-tech industries, the interest rate is very important for their investment plans. So with longer period of high interest rates, that they may scale back on their investment plans, and that's showing up in the stock prices of high-tech industries.
Well, there has certainly been a number of developments, but what can we expect going forward now? I mean, what contingency plans does the government have in place?
Well, the Finance Ministry has actually been hosting a number of ministerial economic meetings in order to discuss how to proceed during this time of economic uncertainties. Supply chains as a whole could be affected by conflict in the region, with such a scenario discussed during a ministerial economic meeting on Thursday. Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok described the supply chain as fragile as thin ice and highlighted the importance of a strong supply chain that many of the country's high-tech sectors are reliant on. This comes ahead of the Act on Supply Chain Stabilization Support that will come into effect in June, and the government hopes that this will ensure stable management of future supply chain risks.
Certainly, let's keep a close eye on how the situation in the Middle East unfolds. Thank you so much for the report today, Heren.
My pleasure.
That is all we have for this week. We thank you for watching Weekly News Highlights. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.